No one tells you about prenups. Not the real truth, anyway. They sell them to you as a safety net, a pragmatic tool for modern love, a sensible agreement between two mature adults. They forget to mention that sometimes the agreement isn't the story. It's just the rulebook for a game you don't even know you're playing. A longer, quieter, and infinitely more ruthless game. My name is Alara, and for 10 years, I believed I was the queen of my own carefully constructed board. I only realized I was a pawn when the game ended, and I was swept clean away. I sit here now, in this boxy, one-bedroom apartment that smells of cheap paint and the lingering ghost of someone else's curry. The city hums a relentless, indifferent tune outside my window. From my old life, I kept only a few things. Among them, a single, ridiculously expensive crystal wine glass. Sometimes I hold it up to the weak afternoon light, watching the way it fractures the world into 1,000 tiny, distorted pieces. It feels appropriate. My life was shattered not with a dramatic, crashing blow, but with the quiet, crisp rustle of legal paper. To understand the wreckage, you have to go back to the architect of my heart. Back to Reese. Reese and I were a story written in the margins of high school textbooks, a secret language whispered during late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a co-conspirator in the grand adventure of becoming ourselves. He understood the thoughts I never voiced, the fears I tried to hide. He smelled of rain-soaked earth and old books, and his hands, though often calloused from tinkering with the engine of his vintage Triumph motorcycle, were always impossibly gentle with me. He saw Alara, not a Morrison, not an heiress, not a future, just me, but to my parents, he was a liability, a charming, poetic dead end in a worn leather jacket. I remember the day the edict came down. I was 20, home from college for the summer. My father summoned me to his study, a room so steeped in wealth and power, it seemed to suck the oxygen from the air. Dark mahogany walls, shelves of leather-bound books that were never read, and the faint, cloying scent of his expensive cigars. "He's going nowhere, Alara," my father said, his voice as clipped and final as the closing bell on Wall Street. He didn't look at me, but at a stock ticker glowing on his monitor. A charming boy, I'm sure. But charm doesn't build an empire. It doesn't secure a legacy. "He makes me happy, Dad," I said, my voice small in the cavernous room. "Happiness is a fleeting commodity," he countered, finally swiveling his leather chair to face me. "Security is not. We have provided you with a path to a secure future, a significant one. We will not finance your decision to wander off that path into the wilderness with a boy who works in a garage." The ultimatum was as cold and hard as the marble fireplace behind him. End things with Reese, or the trust fund my inheritance, my education, my entire future as I knew it would be sealed. The life they had built for me, a gilded cage I had always taken for granted, would be locked from the outside. The choice was between love in a drafty apartment and security in a palace. I was a pragmatist before I was a romantic. I chose the palace. 3 months later, through a carefully arranged introduction by mutual family friends, I met Alistair. Alistair was the antidote to Reese. He was studying finance at Wharton, his family had a summer home in the Hamptons, and his shirts were always perfectly, impeccably pressed. He spoke about 5-year plans and investment portfolios with an easy confidence that my parents found intoxicating. He was handsome in a clean-cut, predictable way that would look good in a wedding photo and a corporate brochure. He was, in a word, safe. The right move on the great, unforgiving chessboard of my life. Except Reese and I never really said goodbye. Our love didn't end. It became a contraband substance, a secret currency traded in stolen moments and coded text messages. We became a ghost story, haunting the edges of my new, sensible life. My parents saw me with Alistair, and sighed with palpable relief. Alistair saw me and thought he'd won the ultimate prize. And I, in my youthful, breathtaking arrogance, believed I was a genius, expertly keeping the best of both worlds in the palms of my hands. When Alistair proposed 2 years later, on a yacht his father owned, the ring was as brilliant and heavy as my future felt. It was the logical next step on the path I had chosen. My parents were ecstatic. His parents were delighted. The merger was a success. And Reese understood. Or at least, that's the story I told myself. I framed it as a strategic move, a temporary sacrifice for a future I vaguely hoped we could one day share, somehow. He accepted it with a sad resignation that I conveniently misinterpreted as patience. The prenup was my parents' idea, of course. Just a precaution, darling, my mother chirped, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. It's just good business. Their lawyers drafted it, and I barely glanced at the terms. They were simple, or so I thought. If we divorced before our 10th anniversary, my substantial family assets remained entirely mine. He would walk away with what he brought in and his share of whatever we'd earned together, which would be modest in the early years. After the 10-year mark, however, the legal definition of our assets would merge. Everything acquired during the marriage became marital property, to be split 50/50ths. It seemed fair. A decade was an eternity. And tucked away in the dense legal jargon was a standard fidelity clause, a boilerplate section I didn't even register. It felt as irrelevant as the font it was printed in. It stipulated that a divorce proven to be caused by infidelity would void the protective terms for the guilty party. I remember the day we signed it, in a sterile conference room with a panoramic view of the city. Alistair's signature on the document was confident, fluid, a perfect, decisive stroke, the signature of a man who knew exactly what he was agreeing to. I signed my own name, my hand surprisingly steady. I felt not like a bride-to-be, but like a CEO finalizing a contract. I believed I was signing the deed to my fortress, a document built to protect my inheritance and my future. I never once imagined it was the blueprint for my own demolition. The first few years of our marriage unfolded like a glossy magazine spread. We were the perfect couple. Alistair, the rising star in finance. Alara, the brilliant consultant with her own burgeoning firm. We hosted elegant dinner parties. We vacationed in St. Bart's. On the surface, it was flawless, and Alistair was the model husband, the very picture of modern, enlightened support. When my consulting job began to demand extensive travel, he was my biggest cheerleader. "Go for it, Alara," he'd say, kissing my forehead as I reviewed a flight itinerary. "Build your empire. I'll hold down the fort here." He never complained about the late nights I spent at the office, the last-minute trips to the West Coast, the weekends I claimed were spent at leadership conferences. Now, I see his support for what it was. He wasn't giving me space to grow, he was giving me rope. Miles and miles of it, and I took every single inch, gleefully and meticulously weaving it into my own noose. Every business trip to Chicago was a clandestine weekend with Reese, who had moved there to join a prestigious architecture firm. Every late-night closing a deal was a 3-hour phone call with him. My voice a whisper in the sterile quiet of my high-rise office, the city lights glittering below like a sea of fallen stars. Every girls' trip to Napa Valley was actually a romantic getaway for two, filled with wine tastings where our fingers would touch over the stems of our glasses and stolen kisses under the warm California sun. I became a master of logistics, a virtuoso of the double life. My compartmentalization was an art form. I had a separate credit card, which I explained to Alistair as a dedicated account for client entertainment expenses that I would later reconcile with my company. That card paid for hotel rooms with sweeping views, plane tickets to cities I had no business in, and intimate dinners where I could look at Reese across a candlelit table and feel, for a moment, like this was my real life. I had a private email account, its notifications synced to a slim burner phone. I kept tucked away in the lining of my travel bag. I could be sitting on the plush cream sofa next to Alistair, his arm casually draped around my shoulders as we watched a movie, and I would be texting Reese under the cover of a throw pillow. I'd type, "I miss the way you look in the morning," while saying to Alistair, "Just a quick email to my team in London." The dexterity of my deception was, I admit, a source of immense pride. The most twisted part is that I felt no guilt. Perhaps that makes me a sociopath. But in the narrative I had constructed for myself, I was the protagonist of an impossible situation. Forced into a corner by my family's draconian demands, this elaborate system was not an act of betrayal, it was a radical act of self-preservation. It was the only way, I reasoned, to keep everyone happy. Alistair was getting exactly what he and my parents wanted, a poised, successful, and socially graceful wife who ran his home beautifully and never caused a scene. My parents got the son-in-law they'd hand-picked, securing the family dynasty. And I got to keep Reese, the keeper of my soul, the one part of my life that felt authentically mine. What Alistair didn't know, I told myself over and over, couldn't possibly hurt him. For 8 years, the system was a well-oiled machine. Alistair's career in finance skyrocketed. He became a partner at his firm, his income multiplying exponentially. My consulting business took off in parallel. We were a power couple, the embodiment of modern success, our combined ambition a potent aphrodisiac to our social circle. Meanwhile, Reese's career as an architect also flourished. He bought a beautiful, minimalist house on the shore of Lake Michigan, a sanctuary of glass and cedar where we could pretend to have a normal life, if only for 48 precious hours at a time. But even the most stable systems develop stress fractures. Reese, ever the romantic, began to grow weary of living in the shadows. One night, we were staying in a boutique hotel in Santa Fe, a trip I had disguised as a solo wellness retreat. The air was cool and smelled of pinyon smoke. "I want to take you to my firm's holiday party next month, Alara," he said, his voice soft in the darkness of the room. He was tracing patterns on my back, a familiar, soothing gesture. "I'm tired of introducing you as an old friend from college. I want to show you off. I want to be able to hold your hand in a room full of people." "You know we can't," I murmured, my standard practiced response. I kissed his shoulder to soften the blow. "It's too risky. We just need to be more patient. We're almost there." I never defined what there was. It was a shimmering, undefined horizon I used to keep him tethered to me. I convinced him, and in doing so, I convinced myself that this delicate, dangerous balance was an act of love, not cowardice. In a bizarre psychological twist, I believed my affair made me a better wife. Because Reese fulfilled my deep emotional and romantic needs, I could be infinitely more patient and understanding with Alistair. I didn't resent his punishing work hours or his innate lack of spontaneous romance, because I wasn't depending on him for those things. I could genuinely appreciate his stability, his sharp intellect, his unwavering ambition, without feeling the gnawing frustration of what was missing. I was getting everything I wanted from two different men, and I foolishly believed this made everyone's lives better. I had achieved the perfect, impossible equilibrium. Confidence is a slow poison, and by year 8, I was drunk on it. The mechanics of my double life had become so routine, so second nature, that the intense vigilance I'd once practiced began to soften at the edges. When something feels effortless, you get sloppy. I'd leave my phone face up on the granite kitchen island when a text from Reese disguised in my phone under a female colleague's name came through. I'd quickly flip it over with a feigned casualness that must have been transparent. I started recycling excuses for my weekend trips, another leadership seminar, without keeping meticulous track of my own lies. I'd return from a weekend with Reese, so full of radiant joy and relaxed energy that I must have seemed like a completely different person from the focused, almost stoic woman who had left on Friday morning. I was glowing with a love that wasn't from my husband. But Alistair never said a word. He never questioned an inconsistent story. He never asked to glance at my phone when it buzzed. He never commented on my sudden, beatific moods. He just continued to be his steady, supportive, understanding self, which I tragically misinterpreted as blissful ignorance. His silence wasn't a question mark. To me, it was a period. It was confirmation that my system was foolproof. What I know now is that he wasn't ignorant. He was compiling, documenting, building his case with the silent, patient precision of a master watchmaker, waiting for the 10th year to strike. Our 10th wedding anniversary fell on an unremarkable Tuesday in May. "A Tuesday feels a bit anticlimactic for a decade, don't you think?" Alistair said, smiling over his morning coffee. The smile I now realize never quite reached his eyes. "Let's do something special this weekend. I'll book that resort up in the mountains you mentioned, the one with the spa and the hiking trails." The weekend was a masterpiece of staged intimacy. A final, flawless performance of a happy marriage. We checked into a sprawling suite with a fireplace and a balcony overlooking the pine-forested valley. We went to a wine tasting, where he toasted, "to the next 10 years. We had a couple's massage, lying side by side in a quiet, lavender-scented room. On our last night, over a multi-course dinner at a restaurant with white tablecloths and hushed waiters, he was more attentive and present than he'd been in years. He reminisced about our first date, our wedding, an early vacation we took. It all felt so genuine, so warm. Then, swirling the deep red wine in his glass, He looked at me, his expression serious. You know, Alara, we're both established now. Our careers are stable. Maybe it's time to start thinking about kids. I'm Sue. Ice water flooded my veins. It was a direct hit on the one topic I always avoided. I pictured a life with him, a real one, with PTA meetings and scraped knees and a shared, unbreakable future. The image was so terrifyingly vivid that I felt a wave of nausea. I manufactured a smile, a hollow, practiced thing, and deflected. Maybe, I said, reaching for my wine. Let's just get through this next quarter. My travel schedule is brutal. He simply nodded, accepting my answer without protest. He was just checking a final box on his list. The dutiful husband, considering the future, rejected by his ambitious, traveling wife. Tuesday morning, 10 years and one single, crucial day after our wedding, Alistair kissed me goodbye and left for work at his usual time. I was working from home, planning to spend the day buried in spreadsheets. Around 10:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. I ignored it, engrossed in a client proposal. But it rang again, and then a third time, sharp and persistent. With an annoyed sigh, I walked to the door and opened it to find a man in a nondescript, ill-fitting suit standing on my meticulously maintained porch. Alara Morrison? He asked, his tone flat. Yes? He handed me a thick manila envelope. The paper felt cold and heavy. You've been served. I laughed. A genuine, startled, disbelieving laugh. It was the sound of a mind refusing to process reality. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong house. My husband and I just celebrated our anniversary 2 days ago. Everything is fine. I tried to hand the envelope back, but he just shook his head, turned, and walked briskly down the path to a waiting sedan. I closed the door, my heart starting to beat a little too fast. The envelope felt alien in my hand. It had to be a mistake. A bizarre prank orchestrated by a friend. Some colossal administrative error. But my name was typed perfectly on the label. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The words swam before my eyes, stark and black against the white paper. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Alistair J. Morrison. Respondent, Alara K. Morrison. The filing date was that very morning. My eyes scanned down the page, my breath catching in my throat. And then I saw it, the final, devastating section. It was titled, List of Exhibits. And beneath it, a bulleted list that read like the index of my doom. Asterisk photographs of respondent with Mr. Reese Connolly, dated from 2017 to 2025. Asterisk authenticated phone records detailing communication between respondent and Mr. Connolly. Asterisk itemized credit card statements from undeclared account. Asterisk hotel and travel receipts corroborating extramarital meetings. Asterisk sworn witness statements from a licensed private investigator. The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. My first reaction wasn't panic or even fear. It was a profound, vertigo-inducing confusion. How? I had been so careful. A ghost. A master of my own universe. How could he have evidence? How could he have been planning this while holding my hand and talking about having children with me just 3 days before? The carefully constructed world I had spent a decade building didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust. My first instinct was denial, a frantic scramble to disprove the evidence in my hands. I called Alistair's office. His assistant, a woman I'd exchanged pleasantries with for years, was suddenly a gatekeeper of ice. I'm sorry, Alara. Mr. Morrison is in back-to-back meetings all day and cannot be reached. I called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, the familiar, cheerful greeting now sounding like a cruel taunt. The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze. I wandered through the rooms of our beautiful house, our house touching the furniture, the photos on the mantelpiece, as if seeing them for the first time. It all felt like a movie set, props for a life that was no longer real. He came home at his normal time, just after 7. He walked into the kitchen, where I sat at the table, the divorce papers spread out like a morbid tarot reading. He was holding a bag of groceries. He didn't look at me. He opened the refrigerator and started putting away a carton of milk, a bunch of kale. Traffic was lighter than usual tonight, he said, his voice terrifyingly even. He glanced at the papers on the table with no more interest than if they were junk mail. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his normalcy finally broke my paralysis. A wave of rage, hot and purifying, washed over me. "What the hell is this, Alistair?" My voice was a raw, shaking thing. He closed the refrigerator door gently and finally turned to face me. His expression was utterly calm. There was no anger, no sadness, no trace of the heartbroken husband. He looked like he was about to explain a complex financial derivative. He was a man closing a transaction. "I think it's time for us to end our marriage, Alara," he said. "How long?" I demanded, the words tearing from my throat. "How long have you known about Reese?" I was bracing myself for him to say he'd found a text a few months ago, that a friend had seen us, that he'd hired an investigator after a recent suspicion. I was prepared for a recent discovery. I was not prepared for his answer. He leaned against the polished granite counter, crossing his arms. His posture was relaxed, patient. "I've suspected since about 6 months after you reconnected with him in Chicago," he said, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "I hired someone to confirm it then. So, I've had definitive knowledge for a little over 8 years. 8 years. The number hung in the air between us, a black hole that sucked all the air and light from the room. 8 years of encouraging my travel. 8 years of celebrating anniversaries with toasts to us. 8 years of listening to my fabricated stories about conferences and client dinners, all while he was receiving detailed reports about where I really was and who I was with. All of it, a lie. A long, patient, meticulously executed lie. "Why?" I whispered, the rage draining out of me, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Why would you wait? Why put us through all of that? Pretend for all those years, if you knew?" He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "The prenup," he said simply, as if explaining the rules of a board game to a child. "Our agreement, the one your father's lawyers drafted so carefully, was quite specific. Before our 10th anniversary, a divorce would have been inconvenient for me. You would have kept your family money and the majority of our shared assets. It would have been a poor return on my investment of time." He pushed off the counter and took a step closer. "But after the 10-year mark, everything changes. Everything we've built together becomes marital property. And then there's the fidelity clause, a beautiful little piece of legal poetry. Because you were in violation of that clause for nearly the entire duration of the marriage, the terms shift rather dramatically in my favor. In fact, my lawyer is confident that I am entitled to significantly more than half reparations, you could call them." The humiliation was a physical blow. It wasn't just that he knew, it was that he had so completely, so calmly, outplayed me. I had been playing checkers, celebrating my small, clever jumps, feeling triumphant with every piece I captured. He had been playing chess, sacrificing pawns, positioning his queen, and seeing the checkmate 10 moves down the line. I hadn't just lost a game. I had lost a game I never even knew I was playing. The next day, I sat in the plush, intimidating office of my new lawyer, Catherine, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who didn't seem to have time for tears. "Alara, I'm not going to sugarcoat this," she said, her voice grim as she slid a thick file across her mahogany desk. "The evidence his team has provided is not just a smoking gun, it's an entire arsenal. It's ironclad." She opened the file, and there it was. My secret life, catalogued and cross-referenced. There was a grainy photo of Reese and me, laughing over coffee at an outdoor cafe in Monterey, a picture I never knew had been taken. There were receipts from a hotel in Napa I'd claimed was a solo spa retreat, clearly showing charges for 2 guests. There were itemized credit card statements from my business account, showing dinners and gifts that couldn't possibly be client entertainment. And there were pages and pages of phone records, a log of hundreds of calls and thousands of texts to a number not associated with any of my legitimate business contacts, complete with cell tower data pinpointing my location during those calls. The final pages were a coolly professional report from a private investigator, detailing my every move on half a dozen of my supposed business trips. "Fighting this would be financial suicide," Catherine stated, her eyes full of a pity I didn't want. "It would be public, humiliating, and you would lose. The prenup your family insisted upon is as solid as they come. Because the affair was continuous and long-term, you've forfeited your right to every single protection they negotiated for you. Our best hope," she sighed, leaning back in her chair, "is to negotiate a settlement. accept fault, and try to walk away with something other than your clothes. I had walked into a trap that had been patiently set for me 8 years ago, and I had done it with a smile on my face, congratulating myself on my own cleverness every single step of the way. The house of cards I had so proudly constructed hadn't just been blown over. It had been meticulously documented before being set on fire. The legal and financial implosion was a swift and brutal demolition, but it was the collateral damage to the people in my orbit that left the deepest craters in my soul. My first call was to my parents. My hand trembled as I dialed the familiar number to their estate. I tried to explain the inexplicable, my voice cracking as I recounted Alistair's cold confession and the existence of the divorce papers. My mother listened in stunned silence. When I finally, haltingly, confessed the truth about Reese, that he had been a constant presence for our entire marriage, the silence on the other end of the line became a solid, heavy thing. It stretched for an eternity. Finally, it was my father who spoke. His voice was not angry. It was far worse. It was the voice he used when a promising investment had soured, a tone of cold, clinical disappointment. "We are deeply disappointed in your choices, Alara," he said. There was no room for discussion. "You have not only failed in your marriage, you have embarrassed this family. You made an agreement. We trusted you to be mature enough to honor it. Clearly, that trust was misplaced. Your mother and I will need some time to process this." And the call ended. There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "How can we help?" Just the cold, hard slam of their judgment. I had been a business deal that had gone bad, and they were cutting their losses. The next, and hardest, call was to Reese. I drove the 2 hours to his lakeside house, the one place on earth I had always considered a sanctuary. The drive was a blur of tears and self-recrimination. When he opened the door, he knew immediately that something was wrong. I collapsed into his arms, and between ragged sobs, I told him everything: the divorce, the prenup, the investigator, the horrifying fact that Alistair had known for 8 long years. He listened silently, his expression hardening from concern to a tense, unreadable mask. When I finished, he didn't pull me closer or offer words of comfort. He gently disengaged from my embrace, walked to the vast picture window in his living room, and stared out at the gray, choppy waters of the lake. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice quiet and tight. "I didn't know, Reese. I swear to you, I had no idea. How could I possibly have known?" "He was having us followed, Alara. Documented for years," he said, turning to face me. For the first time, I saw not just hurt in his eyes, but a flicker of something else. Resentment. "This puts me in a very awkward, very public position. My clients, my partners, they know you as my friend who is married to Alistair Morrison. This is a mess." He took a breath, and his next words were the ones that truly broke me. "Did you ever actually intend to leave him for me? Be honest, or was I just an escape? An affair to make your comfortable, parent-approved marriage more tolerable?" The question hung in the air, ugly and sharp and undeniably true. I couldn't give him a clear answer because I had never allowed myself to formulate one. In my heart of hearts, I had never truly made a choice. I had simply tried to have everything. And now, faced with his raw, honest question, I saw the profound, staggering selfishness of my actions for the very first time. I had used his genuine love as a balm for a life I had chosen out of pragmatism and fear. He saw it too, and the knowledge shattered something between us. "I need some space, Alara," he said, and the words didn't feel like a request. They felt like a verdict. Within weeks, the practical implications of my new reality began to suffocate me. Alistair, efficient as ever, moved into a sleek, furnished corporate apartment downtown, leaving me to rattle around alone in the sprawling, 5-bedroom house we had bought together. The silence was cavernous, and every room echoed with ghosts of a life that was now a lie. I soon received a formal letter from Alistair's lawyer, stating that the house would be sold as part of the asset division and I would need to vacate. I couldn't have afforded the mortgage on my own anyway, not with the mountain of legal fees and the impending collapse of my financial world. My business, the pillar of my identity and my independence, began to crumble. I was a wreck, distracted, emotional, and fundamentally unreliable. I missed key deadlines. I fumbled through client presentations, my mind a fog of regret. Word of the messy, scandalous divorce began to spread through our professional network. It wasn't overt, just a quiet whisper of scandal, but it was enough. Clients began questioning my judgment, my stability. Contracts were not renewed. My carefully built empire, the one Alistair had so ironically encouraged me to build, was dissolving into dust. The most insidious part of it all was realizing how Alistair had weaponized my own ambition against me. He had championed my career, my independence, my travel, not because he was a supportive, modern husband, but because every trip, every late night, every ounce of freedom he gave me was another opportunity for me to incriminate myself. He had been patient and understanding because he knew that my own behavior would eventually be the instrument of my downfall, and that his stoic patience would paint him as the dignified, long-suffering victim. He had not only defeated me, he had masterfully engineered a situation where I had, with my own two hands, defeated myself. 18 months have passed since my world was systematically dismantled. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Sometimes it just turns a raw, gaping injury into a dull, chronic ache. I live here, in this small apartment across town, where the walls are thin and the view is of a brick wall. My consulting business is a memory. I do freelance project management now, piecing together an income that barely covers my rent and bills. It is a life stripped bare of all its former luxuries. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. It was as brutal and efficient as Alistair himself. As his lawyer had predicted, he walked away with the house, the lion's share of our shared investments, and a settlement from my remaining assets that effectively reset my financial clock to zero. He moved on with a speed that felt like a final, calculated act of cruelty. He is dating someone new, a woman he met through his firm. I know this because the few mutual acquaintances I haven't alienated completely mention it with an air of cheerful gossip. She is, by all accounts, everything I wasn't. Completely devoted to him, transparent, honest, and genuinely invested in building a life without one foot perpetually out the door. I saw a picture of them once, on a charity event website. He was smiling, a relaxed, genuine smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. He looked happy. He looked free. In the court of public opinion, he is the hero of his own story, the patient, admirable man who endured a decade of betrayal and finally found the true happiness he deserved. Reese and I tried. For a few months after the initial explosion, we tried to build something real out of the wreckage. But the foundation of our 2-decade relationship, I discovered with dawning horror, had been built on the unstable ground of secrecy. The thrill, the drama, the intoxicating charge of our stolen moments that had been the engine. Without that dynamic, we were just two people who didn't know how to navigate the quiet, mundane realities of a normal relationship. The arguments about where to order takeout, the negotiations of weekend plans, it all felt petty and exhausting. The magic was gone, replaced by a lingering resentment on his part and a deep well of shame on mine. He started seeing someone else, an art teacher. I couldn't even be angry. Our entire relationship had been predicated on the fact that we were both unavailable. Now that I was free, he no longer wanted me. My parents and I are speaking again, but the relationship is fractured, perhaps permanently. The warmth has been replaced by a strained formality. They help me financially when I am truly desperate, but each wire transfer feels less like a gesture of love and more like a quarterly earnings report on their disappointing investment. The hardest part is the quiet, lonely moments late at night, when the distractions of the day fall away and I am left alone with the crushing weight of the truth. Alistair was smarter than me. In every single way that mattered, he was smarter. While I was congratulating myself on my clever juggling act, living in the moment, he was operating on a different timeline, thinking 10 steps, 10 years, ahead. While I was focused on the immediate gratification of my emotional needs, he was patiently building a legal and financial case that would grant him justice, freedom, and an enormous financial victory. I still try, in my weakest moments, to find ways to paint him as the ultimate villain, to cast his cold, calculated deception as a betrayal equal to, or even greater than, my own. And in a way, it was a profound betrayal. He looked me in the eye and lied every single day for 8 years. He pretended to be a loving, supportive husband, while secretly plotting my complete and utter destruction. There's a coldness to his approach, a sociopathic level of calculation that feels, in some ways, more sinister than my emotional, messy, cowardly affair. I was lying because I was trying to avoid hurting people, because I was terrified to make a choice between 2 different lives I desperately wanted. He was lying because he was setting a trap, waiting for the precise moment to spring it for maximum financial and personal leverage. But ultimately, that moral distinction is a comfort I cannot afford. It doesn't change the stark reality of where I am now. I am 31 years old, a pariah in the social circles I once moved through, starting over from scratch. Alistair is moving forward, building the honest, transparent partnership I was never able or willing to give him. Reese is with someone who didn't spend a decade proving that she would always choose the gilded cage of security over the terrifying freedom of love. The most unsettling thought, the one that circles my mind in the darkest hours of the night, is that I still don't know, with absolute certainty, if I would make different choices if I could go back in time. The pressure from my parents, the fear of financial ruin, felt so absolute, so insurmountable at 20 years old. Marrying Alistair gave me the stability and freedom to build a career I loved, a career that is now gone. Maybe the fault lay in not being honest from the very beginning, but that would have meant losing everything I thought I needed to survive. I'm supposed to say that I've learned my lesson, that I've grown as a person from this trauma. But honestly, I think I just learned that I am not nearly as smart as I thought I was, and that other people can be more ruthless than I ever allowed myself to imagine. The saccharine, comforting fairy tale that love and honesty always win in the end, feels like a cruel joke. Alistair won. He won because he was smarter, more patient, and more ruthless. Not because he was more moral or more loving. Perhaps that makes me the villain of this story. I have made peace with that. But I am tired of pretending that everyone else's motives were pure while mine alone were selfish. We all made choices based on what we wanted and what we thought we could get away with. The only difference, the one that matters, is that Alistair's choices worked out, and mine imploded. That doesn't make him a better person than me. It just makes him a smarter player in a game where the stakes were higher than I ever realized.